Watching with us today, criminal defense attorney and my good buddy David Feiga, now also a TV writer and author, and Don Schweitzer, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former homicide detective out in Los Angeles. I'm going to ask you both to stand by because right now we're going to head into that California courtroom. And Donald, I'm going to start with you. You can help us to understand why some of this stuff is coming in and some of it isn't. Tough questions, I think, for Judge Fidler in this trial.
Yeah, I think that the judge did a pretty good balancing act. You know, there were a lot more incidents that he could have allowed in, but he kept them out because there's a certain point where it becomes so prejudicial that the jury no longer looks at the case in chief, but is looking at these prior acts, and they'll just hate Phil Spector and convict him because that's a bad guy.
But so, Donald, haven't we reached that point already? How does the judge decide? And I hear you, there's a point at which it becomes more prejudicial than probative. But how does the judge know what that point is?
You know, the judge doesn't have a magic formula for this. You know, he uses his judgment. In this case, what he's done is he's allowed enough evidence to prove that Phil Spector was living a life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He's somebody that was a little man that liked to play with guns. And, you know, he had a volatile temper, and he liked pointing his gun at people. And the prosecution's made its point. And I think bringing that evidence in was a proper thing to do in light of the circumstances of this case. Excluding the rest of it was probably right as well because it was so overwhelming that, you know, he wouldn't get a fair trial.
Don Schweitzer, I'm coming out to you. You heard Feiga say before, well, sure, maybe she lied a little bit on the job application. She's got that conviction for embezzlement, but so what? I don't know that it helps you all that much in this case.
It helps. You know what? He's doing a great job of showing that she's not a credible witness, but he's not going after her like he could be doing. The other thing is he's keeping it succinct. He's not going after her for days on end. You know, he's getting in and he's getting out. He has to try to impeach her somewhat because the facts of her incident are so similar to the case in chief that he's got to cause some doubt about her credibility. And I think he's doing a good job.
Let's go out to our guest in Los Angeles, and let me ask you the question I asked our good friend David Feiga, Professor Feiga, just before he left us, and that is the best defense for Phil Spector. In your view, Donald, what is it?
Well, the best defense has to start off with addressing these prior victims. Ladies and gentlemen, none of these facts are even similar to what we have here. You know, in this case, Mr. Spector only knew this woman for a couple of hours. You know, she was over for just an introduction, and there's no motive or reason why he would want to be a murderer, that he'd want to kill this woman. You know, in these other instances, there was relationships, and by the way, there's no evidence that he pulls the trigger, you know, against anybody. You know, he's a crazy guy. He likes guns. He's reckless, but he's certainly not a murderer. That's the defense, and it's backed by the physical evidence.
And so you've got to sort of embrace him as he is. Don't try and turn him into something else in front of that jury. All right, let me go out to my guest in the field, former prosecutor and defense attorney. I don't want to bring you into the family squabble, so don't worry. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot, but I heard you earlier essentially agree that Judge Fidler had a lot of stuff on the table. Some of it's coming in, most of it's not. And you seem to feel, Donald, as someone who has prosecuted cases but now also defends them, that the judge has pretty much struck the right balance.
I do, because for one thing, it puts the gun in Phil Spector's hand. If anything else, it's proving that the gun was probably in his hand at this time. And at the same time, this evidence really wasn't about smearing Spector, and that's what I would be worrying about most if I was the defense. You know, they talked about Phil Spector being loving at times. They talked about him being charming, and he goes in and out of rages and stuff. So it wasn't a smear campaign, and so, you know, was it overly prejudicial? Probably not, but very probative.
But somewhat confusing. There was one woman who actually said, well, you know, if he hadn't had the gun, I thought he was kind of cute. I might have, you know. But this wasn't romantic.
That's where the defense could help.
If I'm on the jury.
That's where they could help the defense.
She lost me there. Let me jump out to Don Schweitzer because, of course, we never want to blame the victim in any case, even we defense attorneys. It's certainly, and I say this over and over again on the best, it is somehow anti-victim. At the same time, I do think L.A. is very unique, and I'm asking you this because there you are, seated in L.A. The normal American life goes on. There are lawyers and doctors and dentists and carpenters and school teachers, you know, average American life. And then there's this subculture, or I guess I should say superculture, of Hollywood and celebrity, and Phil Spector a part of that with the music industry. And that has to infiltrate the trial. I just don't see how it cannot. The jury knows what it means to be Phil Spector in L.A., and I think you have to deal with that, as Bruce Cutler did, head on in your opening statement.
I actually think that Bruce Cutler could use it to his advantage. I think what he could show is that this is a guy that engages in sex, drugs, rock and roll, guns. You know, he's a party animal. He's part of the Hollywood scene. And yeah, he lives a crazy life, which includes pointing guns at people and acting wild. But at the end of the day, he's a 70-year-old man that's not a murderer. He's never pulled the trigger before. He's not somebody that kills people. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this was an accident. And it was an accident because she went home with him and she was trying to impress him or whatever they're going to try to do.
Don Schweitzer, I want to come to you. What about the cross-examination of this witness? I think he did a masterful job. We talked about it earlier, talking to people I work with. But yesterday, he caught my ear and I watched the entire cross, glued to it. I don't know that I would do anything more with this witness, though. I think she's made her point. You've undermined her credibility to the extent you can. I think I'd sit down.
You know, I agree with you. You could belabor a point, and you could actually anger the jury by going after a victim too harshly. You know, he's made his point. He's shown that she's not credible in a lot of ways, and he could raise some doubt as to her version of what had happened. And that's all he needs and can do with this witness. So he should probably maybe ask a couple more questions and then sit down.
All right.